Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Why It Matters. My name's Tracy Kronzak. I'm Director of Innovation here at Now It Matters, joined always by my co-host, Tim Lockey.
Hi, thanks for joining.
Wow,
that's all I'm doing. It didn't have to go weird, but then no.
No, right, but wow, okay, but you just thanked me for...
I was thanking our listeners for joining. Oh. I was saying thanks for joining, as in the people listening.
Oh, so, okay. Then you were missing a word. It was like, hi, thanks for joining us. Because you looked right at me and then you were like, hi, thanks for joining. I was like, no, that's your intro.
Thank you for joining Tracy and Cheryl and all of our other listeners.
Thank you. I know that's, what is it? Over nuanced. Sidebar for all our listeners. Today's the day after I've gotten my third COVID vaccination. My left arm is in so much pain. It's ridiculous. So you're going to get some good gems out of me today, I think. I am so pleased to introduce our guest today. I've had the privilege of association and working and friendship and commiseration and mentorship and so many amazing stories with her. It is my honor and joy to welcome Cheryl Porro to our show today.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. And it's so funny, Tracy, because as you were talking, I couldn't help but remember where, I knew you from events and whatnot, but what had happened was we were walking down 24th Street one morning and discovered we were neighbors.
We were.
Right. And then we started to do our Phil's at 24th and Folsom meetups, and whatever happened at Phil's stayed in Phil's.
Just like Vegas. Just like Vegas.
And that's where it all began. So
that was
that fun. Back when Phil was still working at Phil's?
Yes, I would still see Phil at Phil's.
Yes, I would still see Phil.
Phil was like the James Bond of the Mission District. He was just so cool with his fedora.
Yeah,
he was
really cool.
And he had, okay, so first of all, this is Phil's at the corner of 24th and Mission in San Francisco.
Folsom.
Folsom. That's right. Folsom. Sorry, it was one over. 24th and Folsom in San Francisco. Cheryl and I each lived on opposite sides of Bernal Hill for a good long while. I moved there in early 2014, I think. And Phil's Coffee, like that particular one was either the first or second one that they had ever opened.
It was the first. It was the original.
Yeah. And they had all this crazy wall art that had Phil on it. And they had this entire off menu drink selection. And I still have somewhere buried deep in my Evernote all of the off menu drinks I could order. So I would everybody else would be like, can I get a latte? And I'd be like, oh no, wait a minute, hold on. Can I get a Crazy Horse with double shots and a little bit of extra milk? And they'd be like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. And people would be like, what'd you just order? And I'd be like, something. So good.
Awesome. And I have very fond memories of those times.
Me too.
But now I think my job is to talk a little bit about who I am, right?
Yes. Tell us who you are. Besides that person that would meet up with Tracy at Phil's on a fairly regular basis.
Let's see, who am I? So aside from being a technologist, which I am also a San Franciscan. Didn't originate here. I originated outside of Boston and migrated west when I was young. Been here for well over 2 decades. So definitely feel like a San Franciscan, and I'm raising a San Franciscan, more importantly. So
oh my goodness. Yes.
And it's so exciting, like to have raising a 14-year-old in San Francisco who's, who now can like take Muni on her own, and just basically the city is her playground, which was a very different experience than I had. I grew up in the burbs and was always bored. So that is not an issue for my daughter. Technologist, city dweller, nature lover, mom. I'm constantly trying to win the Mom of the Year award. So that's my goal. Every day I want to get Mom of the Year award. So my daughter gets home, I would have already crafted a snack for her that, like maybe a matcha chia pudding, something like that. I know, like,
and Cheryl does mean
Wow.
crafted. These photos
Yeah.
occasionally wind up on the social media.
Yeah, it's true.
And then, yeah, so that's just me. And, throughout my career, I've been in tech for, like I said, a couple of decades. And I worked at companies like Amazon. I worked at companies like Salesforce, spent 13 years there. And I'm currently at a company called Curve Health.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that introduction. Thanks for joining us. I think the last time that you and I spoke was in Tahoe at Tahoe Dreamin', a Tahoe Dreamin' event, either right after we had gone skiing or right before, or something like that. And so you were at Salesforce at that point, and then I and I think others would love to know what has transpired between then and now at Curve Health.
Fantastic. I have a phone making a bunch of noise. I'm going to throw it in another room. It's one of my work phones. So gosh, remind me of what has transpired since Tahoe Dreamin'?
Since Tahoe
Yeah,
Dreamin'.
I think it was maybe
like
even the Tahoe
2018,
Dreamin' where you and I
2017.
presented.
Yes,
Yes, it
that
was.
would be it.
That's
That would
right.
be it. That would be it. Yeah, so let's see. Professionally, definitely a lot of changes professionally since then. So probably, I'm trying to think, in 2018, I was probably a couple of years into my time at Salesforce.org. So 13 years total with Salesforce, first 8.5 with the company, last 4.5 with Salesforce.org, leading product and technology for, the .org. So, had this amazing opportunity to work with all these amazing folks like yourselves in the ecosystem. And that was definitely a highlight for me during my time. But, when it was interesting, because as things were going, there was a little bit of this, 4.5 years, really essentially with the same role. Yeah, I was growing the team, we were launching new products, we were doing all this cool stuff, but there was a little bit of like, what's next, and in sometimes, it's almost too good. Like, oh, I got to shake it up a little bit. Like things are too good, maybe it's time to shake it up, or what's next, or what's the challenge. And there was, I started to get this little, it's like the openness to having the conversation, because I wasn't really overtly looking at that time. I had taken a sabbatical, which was great. I wanted to take some time one summer and just spend it with my daughter while she was still young and still wanted to hang out with me. And I think it was just enough of that opening, having that time away from the team and the ecosystem, and that little bit of a voice in my head saying, are you both like challenged, and two, are you squelching opportunity for people in your team because you won't move, So it was like a dual kind of voice in my head. And I think because of all those circumstances, I was sort of ripe for the picking, and, it was the right opportunity was kind of presented, and I got, excited about it and convinced to leave. So that was kind of what happened at that stage, because I was having a pretty great run, and, I loved what I was able to do, and like loved my team, especially, and the entire team and the people I got to work with and the ecosystem. And but yeah, just ended up moving. So one of the things professionally that I was sort of eager to do, having been at a company for so long, was do something completely new, right? So I had been in that Salesforce world for so long, and it was like, the way I would describe it was like in my veins. Like, I know that platform, the first 7.5 years I worked on the platform, right? So it was just like in my it was my blood, basically. And I wanted to do something very, very different and very new. And so when I joined Thrive Global as their CTO, it was the opportunity to start a platform from scratch. So completely modern stack from the get-go, serverless architecture, microservices based, like Node.js API layer, React front end. Like, it was what all the kids were using at the time. So that was part of it. It was like, oh, can I pull this off? I want to try to pull it off. And that's what I got to do in the year that I was there. I built a team of 25. We built this platform and integrated, like, we built an integration with Salesforce, definitely leveraged my relationships to pull that off. Ended up selling that to Salesforce, which was cool. So yeah, that Thrive.
I didn't realize you wound up selling that. to Salesforce. I didn't realize that was at the fate of it.
I don't know if it's, yeah. There was some of the well-being platform is enabled by the Thrive Global platform, as well as to other companies too. So, it was a cool experience. And then eventually, it wasn't, I just was ready for a change. I actually took some time off. And that's actually kind of pivotal, important, I think, in my journey, because I remember at that point, there was a lot going on in my mind around like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And this was pre-pandemic. So a lot of it had to do with, really waking up to like climate disaster and climate change, and just realizing that like, I am living a lifestyle that is out of line with my values. And it just hit me in such a palpable way at that time that literally I just stopped everything. I, stopped commuting, right? Because I didn't have to. I was riding bikes everywhere. I was making all my own stuff. I was buying, as much as I could waste free. I was pickling my own jalapenos, making my own deodorant, like you name it, I was doing it. And I felt like I needed that time to do this complete 180 in my life as a reset, so that I could come back to something that was more aligned, like values aligned. So it was an exciting time. And I, but also a challenging time, because I wasn't working and I wasn't sure about what I wanted to do next in that moment, but I needed it. Like I needed that kind of time to process everything that was going on. And then the pandemic hit. So that was like, I always say that I felt like I was a couple of months in advance of everyone, because I had already completely, sort of hit a wall, and felt a little bit ready for it. I was like, I had a lot of tools I had put in place and developed to kind of manage a lot of what was going on around my relationship to the status quo and relationship to how I was living, et cetera, that, I felt kind of like ready in some ways for what happened with the pandemic. And then because of that, I was starting a job search, but I put that on pause. Like I was deep in with the company and I basically had to pull out, in part because my daughter was Zoom schooling. That was a lot to manage. Both my parents got COVID. That was a lot to manage. And it felt really good to just be able to support everyone and not have to like get back to work. So I delayed my search until after the summer as things started to settle down. And then I was ready. I was ready to find the next opportunity, ready to find something that was really aligned with what I care about, and then ended up where I'm at now, Curve Health. So that was it's both a little bit of a journey that's professional and personal, and it's always intertwined for me. Like I can't separate the two. Life is much too complex to separate out personal and professional.
I think what's really interesting in all of that, and I remember, so I was kind of also in a very similar position before the pandemic started. I had left Salesforce for a job that I thought was going to be something I could be at for a while, and it kind of ended in a really bad way. And folks have heard bits and pieces of that, and they will continue to. But the interesting part about that was I literally remember having coffee with you in like February of 2019. And we were both just feeling a little strung out is what I remember. And we were like, and the world just literally got over being on fire. Cause remember we had all those days in San Francisco where it was just the orange day, and then the smoke kept going, and Trump and everything. And I just remember walking away being like, oh no, like if Cheryl's on the ropes, then like, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. But what was really interesting was, I had another job offer ready to go on Friday, the 15th, or no, it was Friday, the 13th of March, 2020. Yeah. And I was like, great, I'm going to go ski for a week. So I went to Montana, and I remember telling you that, Cheryl. I was like, well, there's this company I'm talking to and it's looking good, so keep your fingers crossed. That came through. I went skiing in Montana, and at the beginning of the week, it was like, there's this weird thing happening in China. And at the end of the week, it was like the whole world is
Yeah.
I
shutting
was like,
down.
buy toilet paper now.
Buy toilet paper, stock up on meat, do whatever. And the last communication I had with the woman that owned that company on Friday the 13th was like, hey, this looks great. Can we like adjust these couple of things in the offer letter? Sure. She writes me back right away. She's like, sure. Like, I'll just send you a revision on Monday and we'll go from there. And Monday came and went, and I was like, hi, where are you? And I will say that this is the difference between like people with integrity and people without integrity right here. She called me up by like Wednesday of that week, and she was like, I can't predict anything anymore, and I can't make job offers. And it's not about what we just negotiated. It's about the fact that I'm not even sure I'm going to have a business in 2 months. And we have stayed friends since, and she's a lovely human being, has now gone through her second acquisition. But it's funny, what I also think about that time is right after that, we all just went into this long, dark tunnel, right? And that long, dark tunnel, by the way, connects to everything we were just talking about before we hit record. And that is, how did we do taking care of ourselves? And what did this bring up for all of us regarding the way that we interact with the world? And I'm now finally reconnecting with folks after about 12 months or 14 months in this tunnel. But I mean, what were some of the lessons that we should be taking out of that? Because I want to use this as a segue into a lot of the things that you're currently working on now, and a lot of the things that we were talking about, why you are where you are.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much there, right? I mean, ultimately, it's like, for me, it's all around health of people and planet, and we can't ignore that stuff. Like if we ignore it, it's at our peril. And I remember, so just a funny little anecdote about that, those early days of the pandemic was, I remember, even though I was no longer at Salesforce, I remember that Salesforce was going to have like a public sort of live session, and Mark was going to speak. And I thought, maybe he has the answers. Like someone's got to have the answers. And then so I got on this session, and it was very clear he did not have the answers, and he was freaking the hell out, you know?
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. What was he saying?
Like, oh,
I have no idea.
He's like, the world, it's the world. Like you could, Mark is usually super poised, and he's very scripted. And he just, you could tell where it was just like, there was no script. He was just like, I got to say something. I have no idea what to say, so I'm just going to talk.
Yeah, exactly. And I saw it, and it was really clear to me that while there's a lot that tech can do, you know, to facilitate things, it was not getting getting us out of this situation. It just wasn't. And in fact, probably generally exacerbates the situation, right? So that was an aha for me as someone who's been in technology forever. And really up until like the pandemic, it was like all we're amazing, right? Like tech is going to save the world. And then it's like, oh, and now when the world needs saving, oh, sorry, we can't, you know, we don't have an app for that, you know?
Well, there is no app for saving the world, right? Like, and it was really funny seeing tech's response, right? I'll honestly say I was a little dismayed with Salesforce's response, because they went immediately to like, we're going to create a new cloud and sell it to you to solve the world. And I was like, but like some other companies didn't really have any answers either. So, and then like Microsoft got into it with their employees around like working at home before they were like, oh no, everybody just works at home now. You know, Google struggled with this. So this is not like a ding against any one of them. It is to say that everybody retreated to the motion that they know best.
Mm-hmm.
But that motion that they know best that might have gotten them to March 13, 2020 isn't what we need now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We're just sort of forced to rethink everything. And I do think that like all of these statements that were said as like absolute truths have been proven to not be, right? And so now's the opportunity, right? And it's in these disruptive moments that where the opportunity for really changing the game exists, right? And that was a big reason, for example, why I ended up joining Curve Health, you know, which brings telehealth to specific spaces with really sort of sick patient population is because it was really hard to do that pre-pandemic, right? Like 2% of doctors use telehealth. Like very few individuals got their healthcare via technology, right? And then in overnight, now it's up to 86% of doctors have done telehealth. So it just changes the game. And of course, consumers are much more comfortable having visits over telehealth where they didn't before. And that was drawing me. I was like, I know that what is happening now is going to be the future. And there's this opportunity because everything that might have taken a decade to evolve has just happened like that. And I do think there's other places where there are opportunities to rethink our approaches in a way that is like better for people and better for planet, but fundamentally too, because it's tough because we touched on this a little bit. There's like the profit-driven, growth-driven agendas that can sometimes get in the way of achieving what's best for people and planet. But
well, if I recall, the insurance industry didn't even have a mechanism by which to adequately bill for telehealth. So that was one of the early hurdles, if I recall. It's like, well, we don't consider a doctor appointment delivered over video valid.
Yeah, that's very much true. And there you couldn't sort of reimburse outside of particular settings for Medicare telehealth. And so the company I joined had a predecessor company that had to shut down for that very reason. And the founding team of that company had been, on Capitol Hill. They actually helped put together this thing called the Rush Act. It was reducing unnecessary senior hospitalizations. And then the government shut down. It was like January 2019. So they didn't get it passed. But the thing that happened was as soon as the pandemic hit, like all of the thinking had been done. The infrastructure was there. They knew what they needed to do and they just kind of implemented it. And then of course Curve sort of was reborn. The assets from the former company were kind of acquired and then we got going. So yeah, it's just one story, I think, of many. But I think about that from when I think about, one of the things that was getting me as I left my role that fall that I was talking about was I just remember, when I would commute to the office, just seeing all these like masses of people, right? Like walking and biking and Ubering and Muning and Barding. And I'm like, where are we all going and why? Like this doesn't add up or make sense to me anymore. Like so much kind of movement that is unnecessary in this day and age, but we just do it because it's like what we've always done, right? And all of a sudden I was like, I don't want to do that anymore. I just don't want to do it. And and that was my motivation, was very much like just the sort of environmental stuff. But then when the pandemic hit, we just saw too, it's like, it's all unnecessary. And I think everyone's sort of waking up to that. Like there's a time and place to get together. And I like to do that occasionally, but we don't, a lot of us, at least in the work that we do as technologists, we don't need to be sitting next to each other. It's like ridiculous. Cause I know in my world with engineers, it's like, even if they're in the office together, they just have like 3 monitors, headphones on, not making eye contact. Mm-hmm. And if they want to have a conversation with the colleague sitting next to them, they do it via Slack.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah, I just got a Gallup poll where it was like, because Gallup, your opinion counts. Did definitely put that in air quotes. They were actually saying like, well, what perks would you change your job for? And it was all that crap. It was like, do you want a coffee house? Do you want a gym? Do you want an on-site everything? And I'm like, I have a gym. It's called my garage. I have a coffee house. It's called my Chemex, and I have like on-site therapy. It's called my dog. Like I don't need to go to a workplace to replicate what I have at home. Tell us more about, because Curve is involved explicitly at end of life care. And we were talking a lot about how that connects to technology bringing dignity. The quote that you said was, technology is dignity for a lot of folks. Connect the dots for folks in terms of how that dignity gets represented and what you're solving in end of life care and why this is important to you.
Gosh, it's so, we touched on this a little bit, right? And there's so much to it because there's like there is the culture in which we're in, right? That avoids conversations about sickness and death. And I am like absolutely guilty of that, which is partly why I'm like leaning into all of this right now, because to date, you know, I don't live close to my family. I'm on the other coast. When stuff goes down, I'm typically not around, right? So I hear about it third hand, and like that's always worked for me. I don't want to be present
Oh,
in these
wow.
moments.
Wish I were there. We're out in California.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
God, so grateful for you. Yeah.
So sorry. And to date, it's, you know, fundamentally, it's like when I think about, you know, and my mom, for example, was in the ICU with COVID, right, for a week, thankfully got better and got out, but it became very real of like, if my parents were to get very sick, like typically when my mom is sick, I never hear about it until stuff's passed. Like they don't tell me anyway. And that's good, right? Like the old me would be like, cool, thanks for not letting me know, you know? But I don't want to, God, it's like, I don't want to drop the ball. Like fundamentally, I care about them a lot. They're like some of the most important people in my life, right? And if they were to be in that place, I don't want to be absent from that. I want to be able to be there with like grace, dignity, courage to face it and be present. So that was like the motivator for me of like leaning into getting more comfortable. So there's the culture, and absolutely. So for example, I participated in a couple of things over the past month. So one was like an IDEO hosted panel around the end of life experience. And one of the participants is this amazing doctor named Claritza, who's local actually, and we're hoping to meet up in person soon, who is a palliative care, you know, specialist and trains doctors and providers in how to have these conversations, because it's not natural, right? It's not like, if our culture is to avoid these conversations, even our doctors don't know how to have them, right? And that was like an amazing experience to be with this group of people who are, you know, looking at sort of the end of life experience from different angles. And it was a real wake up for me, right? Just seeing that there's a lot of energy around it. And then the other thing I participated in was a conference around the use of psychedelics in end of life, again, hosted by MDs. And there's a lot of research around that and how we can use psychedelics to kind of ease the transition. Because so much of, you know, the way the system is set up, and especially in our, if you're deep in the healthcare space, it's like the fee for service world where, you know, every little thing you do to a patient, you can get reimbursed for. And that incentivizes a lot of stuff. And it incentivizes a lot of things that are unnecessary and maybe not even what the patient wants. So if you combine the fact that like, we don't know what the patient's wishes are because no one knows how to talk to them about what their wishes are, right? Like, what do you really, how do you want your death? What do you want it to be like? So the way Claritza talked about it was like, we spend so much time and energy thinking about how we want our babies to be born, in like zero about how we want our loved ones to pass through, right? To die. So how can, you know, and like death needs a new marketer, you know, it's basically what she was saying.
As you're talking about that, one of the things it makes me realize is that I think the healthcare system, I mean, I think of it this way too, is death is failure, a failure of sorts. Like
Yes.
we failed to keep you alive, or the doctor failed. So if someone dies, someone else is at fault, or something's wrong. And I think it's interesting to think about death not as failure, because what that does is it means that keeping people alive, you know, is success, no matter what the cost, no matter what their preference. Keeping people alive is success. And I feel like that actually erases any, you know, conversation that's possible around it.
And so that's where there's like where you lose that dignity, right? Because like,
right.
What's important is, as individuals, it's like, how do you want your life? Like, what's important to you? So when you're having those discussions with a provider who's skilled and adept at having the discussion, it's like, what's important to you? Like, if you're super passionate about food and the food you eat, and you get to the point where you can no longer eat, do you still value your like life, right? Like, and these are hard things to talk about.
Yeah.
So there's the culture, the conversations, there's the infrastructure, right? That sort of doesn't support, although there is a shift towards like what's referred to as value-based care, which definitely is more supportive of having these conversations and doing less, right? Or at least doing what's aligned with the patient's wishes. And how do you do that at scale, right? Because like, as I was saying, if you're if you are privileged and have a lot of resources, you can have a very, very specific kind of end of life experience. And there are, lots of institutions out there that can help with that, right? But if you're not, it can be very, very, very challenging. You can end up in a nursing home that maybe is understaffed and maybe undersupported from a MD side. You don't have the opportunity to have those conversations, and like the experience is going to be suboptimal and not dignified, right? So that's how we are bring technology to scale it, right? So it's about the things like telehealth, like being, you don't have to have a doctor, present in the building in order to have these visits. And that saves a lot, right, of resources and the training that comes along with it. So we have like these goals of care modules that guide our providers and how to have the conversation. So that's sort of the work that Curve's doing, is trying to bring that through technology to more individuals, to try to bring more dignity to the end of life experience. And yes, we can save billions of dollars for the US healthcare system of unnecessary emergency room visits and treatments and things like that that don't need to happen, right? That don't help with patient outcome or patient experience. They're just like done, if that makes sense.
Is there
Oh,
is
yeah.
there a concern that that if we got more comfortable with that conversation, and if the goal the goal changed to value of life, is there a concern that insurance would be incentivized to see end of life happen sooner? Would that be a concern as well, or is there so much fee for service that it's actually quite the opposite?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it's quite the opposite. I mean, it's kind of in the beginning, and there's always going to be a need to be able to kind of understand patient outcomes and making sure you have superior patient care, and that you're not just maybe doing like engaging in like coercing a goals of care conversation that will end up with like minimal interventions, that kind of thing. So it definitely relies on having providers with best intentions, right, to honor the lives in front of them, which I do think, at least I come across a lot of those, especially in the value-based space. That's their goal and intention, right, is to have a better patient experience, even if that means you're easing someone's transition, right, to death in a way that's like less awful.
It's funny, Tim, you are touching on one of the topics that I touched on in a public health class that I took back in grad school. And it was all around that idea of where the economic incentive is. And we were studying it from the angle of actually the economic incentive is from truly keep people alive at all costs. And the book that we were talking about right before we pressed record was How We Die by Sherwin Newland, who looks at death as an industry and says we have drifted very far away from the idea that death is an organic experience and far towards the sort of keep people alive at all cost experience that the industry supports from an economic angle. What was interesting though was that was also the it was years ago when Dr. Kevorkian was making news, and there were a lot of discussions about how to create policy around right to death, and one of the perspectives was we can't create policy around this in so much as we can create policy that says you're not going to be penalized for this. And that is the farthest that anyone has really thought it through, because otherwise there is the fear that you raised around, are we economically incentivizing things in the other direction? But it was that book for our readers. Please go read it. How We Die by Sherwin Newland. It changed my life. It made me a staunch right to die person. It immediately flipped the switch on my driver's license to DNR, which I've carried ever since. And it really talks deeply about the discomfort we have in our society around these issues, and how we've created a whole industry to support our discomfort around these issues.
Yeah. And it reminds me, I want to mention another book when I'm pulling it up so that I don't get the title wrong. Because this is definitely, and I want to pivot now to kind of the more positive angle, because we've been in like deep in death. But it's called The Worm at the Core by Sheldon Solomon. And I checked out the audiobook and I'm just like partway through, but so much, because this is what gets to what I kind of want to touch on next, because it's like my personal passion and how it sort of dovetails with my professional work. But there's so much of our behaviors that are somewhat inexplicable that really just are rooted in fear of death, right? And so that was the kind of aha for me that I had, was like, if I am so passionate about living a full, vibrant, long, wonderful life, how can I do that if I can't honor death, if I can't talk about death, if I can't confront death? And then there's also another book about sort of from a Buddhist standpoint, like, and
No Fear, No Death by Thich Nhat Hanh.
Yeah.
Yep.
And others. So yes, I'm sort of leaning into that, but there's definitely this angle for me that's like very generative and positive and optimistic, and that I also am really passionate about the sort of lifespan, health span movement. So I don't want to call it anti-aging, because people think of like plastic surgery and these sorts of things, not that, but the real scientific work that's being done to essentially treat aging as a disease, right? And the sort of illnesses that come along with it, cancer, diabetes, heart attacks, these sorts of things. And there's lots of folks that are kind of doing the research and talking about it. One of my favorite is David Sinclair out of Harvard, and has a website called lifespan.io. So I am personally always experimenting on myself, not in like drastic ways, but definitely adopting a lot of these habits, and whether it's the way I eat or the way I exercise or supplements I might take, all kind of aligned around vitality, like maintaining vitality as I age. So and part of that is because I turned 50 in a few weeks. And anytime I get to a milestone birthday, I start to get all worked up about anti-aging. And it's funny because there's this company that does something called the Inside Age. And about a year and a half ago, I did my Inside Age, or was it a year ago? I'd already been working on this stuff, and my Inside Age was only like a year younger. And I was very pissed off because I was like, it should be better. So I still had some markers that were kind of high, and then I redid it, and now I'm like 6 years younger. So yeah, I'm just sort of checking in along the way. And what's been so amazing is, like, first of all, am I allowed to swear in your podcast?
Oh, hell
yes.
Yeah. And what's kind of nuts is, like, through all this, like, when I talked to you that February, right, in that coffee shop, I remember in Glen Park.
February 2020, Glen Park.
Yeah, I was in a dark place.
Me too.
Yeah. And it's like, I really believe it's like being in these holes and climbing yourself out is what it's like, how you evolve, right? And climbing out of that, and all the things I've been doing since, I've gotten to this place where I just feel fucking fantastic. And and I see, and it's one of those things where it's like, I see a lot of suffering around me, a lot of suffering that I think is somewhat unnecessary, but I get like everyone has to go on their own journey, right? And that was me. And I've been on this journey for a while, and every step of the way, I'm always looking for something new. And I have setbacks, like I had that setback, right? And I had to kind of climb out of that, but it's just kind of amazing. And so these things that I do, like, I'm sure, for example, and it's like a rare day that I don't fit it in, but I'm sure to do like my mindfulness practice and breath work every day. I am lucky in that I got a house with a hot tub, so I do it in the hot tub. So there's an incentive there for me to do it every day. Yeah. And it's a rare day I'll miss it. So all I need is 20 minutes. 20 minutes, usually in the morning, get my coffee. It's nice and chilly, get in the hot tub, do all these things. That 20 minutes. I work out almost every day.
Yep.
Make time for that. And that, like, I came around to just years ago, knowing that every minute I work out, I get back 5 minutes and like energy in the rest of my day. So I never have a battle with myself around taking time away to work out, because I know it's gonna like pay dividends. Sleep, like focusing on sleep. And then the last thing I did, and you know, I don't want to necessarily be a proponent of any one way, because I think everyone's different. But I did the sort of experiment of going like fully vegan for a month. And that just really was freaking amazing. Like I've never felt more well nourished in my life. And I combine that with intermittent fasting, which, you know, if you listen to these folks, is another big helpful thing with anti-aging and health span.
Was that recent? The vegan move?
Yeah, it was September, the month of September.
Okay.
I did like a wellness camp with this group called 1-to-1 Tribe. They're great. And it had a lot to it. It wasn't just the food, but the food was like the real revelation for me, because I was trying to be vegan, but I was just like, the food was boring. It wasn't satisfying. I was always hungry. And so like inevitably at the end of the day, I was finding something processed or something, or cheese, you know, like something like that. So I really struggled to maintain it, literally. And with this program, like I just discovered a really amazing food and recipes. And now, you know, I just feel really well nourished and really satisfied and like on fire, which has been fantastic. And I make time, you know, I have to make time to prep food, right? To like cut up veggies and do all these things. And again, like I don't feel at all bad about it. Like there's always work to do. There's always a million things to do. I work at a seed stage startup, right? I have 5 jobs at that seed stage startup. I could work all day, every day and not be done my job, right? So at some point I need to say, this other stuff's important. And we're going to figure it out. Like we're going to figure out how to make it work. And I do think that all those minutes that I carve out for myself, I get a return on it, because I have more energy, I have more creativity, you know, I'm on fire basically, right? Whereas when I'm not doing those things, I feel it. I'm like sluggish. I don't have the energy. I procrastinate. I want to watch more Netflix. I still like to watch Netflix, don't get me wrong, but
wow. Hashtag no judgment there. I mean, shoot. I think what's super interesting about all this, Cheryl, is, I mean, honestly, to take it back to tech for a second, you know, one of the things that I observed about the IT kind of pantheon of approaches to worker retention was, we're just going to recreate your life here, so you don't ever have to leave. We're going to give you coffee houses. We're going to give you dry cleaners. We're going to give you showers. We're going to give you napping cubbies. We're going to give you everything. And it sounds really great on paper until you take a step back and realize that actually disconnects you from the world. And that's the desired outcome, is because the more disconnected from the world you are, the harder you're going to work exactly in the place that you are. And I think what's fascinating is the culture of Silicon Valley is so opposite of everything that you've just articulated, because it is so easy to find something you're passionate about and create and build. But at the same time, you know, you were talking about talent that gets left behind in that approach. And, you know, you sound different, and, you know, you go into a board meeting and you're like, what we all need to do is take space for ourselves. And that's not the approach that I think wins the pitch, in so much as, you know, we're just going to work ourselves to death to get this done. But yet look at everything that gets left behind. in that culture and in that model. It leaves a life behind. And to your point, it leaves a family behind, and it leaves
Yes.
talent behind.
That's exactly it. That's what, like, leaves family behind. Like, I can't do it any other way, right? And be the parent I want to be the daughter I want to be. And there are a lot of people in that position, because caregiving isn't just being a parent, right? At some point, we end up with others that we have to take care of in our lives. And the fact that you have to choose between being great at your work and being great as a human is just such an unfortunate situation to put people in. And it, in fact, angers me that
Yeah.
is expected. And it does box out a bunch of folks. And you see the impact of the pandemic, for example, on working moms, right? A lot have left the workforce. There's like the great resignation. There are many employees across many industries who are just like, yeah, no, not doing it anymore. Like, things have to change, because we're not, people aren't washing machines and dryers and washer dryer combos. They're human beings. And I do believe that if they're, especially in the kind of work we do, the more you can show up in the rest of your life fully, the more you're going to be able to show up for your work in a way that's most effective. I feel very effective at my job. And I know my boss and my colleagues would say that I'm very effective at my job. The amount of stuff that I'm able to accomplish, is pretty, there's a lot, I'll admit. And I think it's because of my approach. I believe it. And so I want that, and I want that for everyone. I want that for all, everyone on our team. And I want everyone to be able to show up for their lives with the same amount of energy, right?
There's such a fear of that, isn't
Yeah,
there?
there is.
Like, just such a fear that you're going to take down all of the safeguards that keep people nose to the grindstone. And because of that, they won't work hard, which is weird, because I don't know anybody in tech who doesn't work hard,
Yeah.
Exactly
except
it.
people who are fed up with the companies that they work
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
right? Like that,
Yeah.
like, people want to be engaged. They
Yeah.
desperately want to find work that is meaningful, that they can engage in. So yeah,
And they want
it's
to feel
interesting.
valued for it, and they want to
Yep.
feel like they can do it without having to sacrifice, the responsibilities they have at home, and their passions, and their, anything else that creates a full life. Because
But the
ultimately, it's like,
decision makers at the top on that
yeah,
have to
they should.
confront that fear,
Yeah.
right? And I feel like the Great Resignation is finally
Yes.
creating an alternative fear that is making the case for why
Agreed.
you do this kind of thing. So
Agreed.
it's just interesting. Yeah.
It is interesting. It is very interesting. And I do think it's a sort of a pretty seminal moment, right? Because it's just an unusual time we're in, and and an opportunity. And you see a lot of companies sort of coming around because they see that they have to. And then the ones that don't their employees are going to get poached.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I'm actively working on that on a regular basis.
Good.
I've hired some amazing talent from companies that are demanding their employees come back to work.
Yeah. I don't.
Come back to the office.
That is intensely clever. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I have, I've had my own version of that, particularly over the past 18 months 18 months now, and still going here, because I was a firm believer in that idea that, like, you just show up and you work yourself to death, and then someday that will be rewarded, except that doesn't actually work for anyone who isn't a white guy. And it doesn't actually work for anybody who has thoughts and ideas that are bigger than the swim lane that they've been assigned to. And it doesn't work for when the whole world falls apart. And, my primary care right now is we need to make it to the finish line so that our kids can get vaccinated, because both of them are under 12. And there is not a single thing I wouldn't do to get to that finish line unscathed. Right. So, I mentioned I just had my third COVID shot. That's largely because that'll help like stave it off in case I'm exposed to it with the kids. Right. But in another life, the single most important thing was vice president in 5 years. And it's funny how that priority changed for all of us, really. And people look at me now and they're like, well, you seem happy. And there are days, and Tim's going to hate this, there are days where I'm like, I don't know what I do, but I try to do it every day. I don't know what I do, but I try to do it every day. I'm like, man, I'm just going to wake up and hustle and see what happens. But there are
Called
also
innovation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a podcast where somebody was like, if you have to give somebody a title of like director of innovation, you're doing it wrong. And I'm like, I know.
That's awesome.
But their point was don't compartmentalize, right? And that's the thing. It's like you can't compartmentalize these things anymore. And I think by making our lives less compartmentalized and having these hard discussions about these things, we all get better and we all show up for what we want to do. And God, I sleep 7.5 to 8 hours and 15 minutes a night. And I got to tell you, when I was working for big corporate entities, that was all the way down to 4.5, 5 hours. And I have the data that proves it because I have the sleep app.
Yeah.
For 6 years of history
for
now.
you, health-wise.
No, it drives you crazy. It literally drives you crazy. Not enough sleep will literally drive you crazy.
Absolutely. In the moment. And then it has lasting effects too, right? If you keep doing that. And that's the main thing. It's like just looping it back into the part of the earlier part of the conversation. When you talk to people at the end of their life, it's like their regrets aren't, the promotion they didn't get or the exit they didn't get. It's the real meaningful human connection that they might have not invested in, time with their families they didn't invest in. These are the regrets people have. I don't want to end up in that place of like, one, my body's falling apart, so I can't enjoy life when I'm retired, say, and or having these sorts of existential regrets. Because I do think it can be a false choice, at least for folks. I mean, I will acknowledge I am in a place of privilege, right? I'm a technology executive in a health tech startup. So I get that. I don't have to have multiple jobs. I do, but that's just because I want to. So yeah, it's a position of privilege, but if anyone shouldn't be suffering, it's me, right? And so that's kind of the message for me is like, how much of the suffering that you're experiencing is avoidable, right? Because we're sort of just tunnel vision, trying to just going along with the status quo, and not just rethinking. And this is the opportunity to rethink. And I do think a lot of people are sort of rethinking their approach to kind of work in life in this moment and wanting and demanding more. So that makes me happy.
What's the message then for execs in this moment?
I think for execs, I really do think it's existential threat as well, because if they are leading the old way, they will have a lot of challenges attracting and retaining talent. It's just not going to work, in my opinion. And I'm seeing that left and right, and will facilitate it as much as possible, either through hiring those people or referring them to better companies.
Hashtag Cheryl is hiring is trending on Twitter right now.
Yeah. So there's I think it's an existential threat. And ultimately it's like, it's all rooted in the fear of dying. So, maybe read Worm at the Core and reevaluate, what your underlying value system is. If you're so afraid of your employees having a little bit of space, why? Ask yourself why. Yeah. Because that control, that clinging, that holding on we know it just has the opposite effect. It causes people to want to hightail it and fake work, right? Like they get really good at faking work.
I think you just described the Soviet Union. I mean, we pretend to work, they pretend to pay us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like your line that we are not washing machines. Like we're not
Yeah.
giants. Like we are entire people. So
yeah.
It's funny because that connects to something that I have a friend and colleague, Rachel Hands, who learns a lot about managing people, and the language and she would tell me the language that we use to describe people accurately reflects the culture and context of those people's work. So this isn't just a change of how we work with people. This is a change of the culture around work. And I guess what I want to ask you to sort of end this is, do you see our culture of work changing? And where do you feel like the work to continue that culture change needs to happen?
I do. And I think it gets back to that line, right? Of we are not resources. We are humans. And the truth too, and I've been thinking a lot about this, especially in the work I'm doing, when you think about the impact of AI and automation on work and where that's going in the future, the fact is that there is a lot that's going to be automatable. You know what's not going to be automatable? The human side of work, caregiving, educating, these things like traditionally seen as women's work, these things that are traditionally undervalued and underpaid and therefore under-resourced. These are going to be the unautomatable roles in the future. And even the work that I do, like the work of technologists, going to be pretty automatable. Pretty soon the computers will be coding themselves. Yep. Well, thankfully I'm an executive, so that's a little different. I don't write code anymore.
There always needs to be somebody to flip the switch.
So starting to actually value what humans bring to the table, because that is going to be the only differentiator in the future, right? In 20, 50 years is in our ability to code. Is going to be our ability to show up as full humans. So if we're expecting employees to show up as machines, get to work and not want to do, then you're missing the point, frankly, in my opinion.
I had a conversation once with Ayori Selassie, who I think you also know, who does a lot of work with AI. And I'm recalling that conversation because she was terrified of something she had discovered in an AI algorithm that she was working with.
I remember.
And at the same time, because AIs exist in a constant learning state, the implications of what you just said for something like AI is that the AI itself is going to think of humans as interchangeable when they are not. And that's terrifying, actually, if you really think about what that means for automation. Hey, did you want to plug your podcast before we wrap? Because Cheryl also has her own recordings. You can find them on LinkedIn. I know for sure is where I've listened to a few, but
yeah, LinkedIn and YouTube. Primarily, I've been doing stuff with Larry, and I'm not going to pronounce his name right. So he is
Salvadorello
over
at Arcus.
Yes, over at Arcus. And it's funny because he and I actually got an executive coaching certificate last year. He also does some coaching. So we got connected really through our mutual relationship with Pep Up Tech and offering to do some coaching for Pep Up Tech. So then Selena connected Larry and I. And at first I was just like, why am I being connected to the co-founder of Arcus? I don't work at Salesforce anymore. And then I met with Larry and I was like, oh, he's like my brother from another mother,
Larry is truly a sensitive and amazing human being. And we should all be so lucky to have more Larrys in this world. I know that for sure. Is the name of your podcast
mindset.
Conversations with Cheryl and Larry? Is that it?
Yeah, that is it. It is out there. I also, there's in other things that I do. I do a little bit of coaching for helping to diversify the C-suite in tech. So I usually have a couple of coaches going on and looking at some other stuff in the future I might do. So we'll see. But yeah, I always like to have something going on, just trying to move the needle a little bit with some of these things I'm passionate about, whether it's diversifying technology. I get on a lot of CTO panels and I'm the only woman, surprise, surprise, or just helping, folks live an amazing life as they age.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for Thanks for taking the time to talk with us. And
My pleasure.
thanks
Always.
for all the work that you still do and that you've been doing for so long.
You're welcome. And thank you right back, because you guys do awesome work as well. So thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. Miss you guys.
Miss you too.
Folks. Ciao.
Ciao.
I'm Tim Lockey.
I'm Tracy Kronzak, and you've been listening to Why It Matters.
Why It Matters is a thought leadership project of Now It Matters, a strategic services firm offering advising and guiding to nonprofit and social impact organizations.
If you like what you've heard, please subscribe, check out our playlists, and visit us at nowitmatters.com to learn more about us.